Well, hello and welcome to Business 360. I'm Ashmit Kumar. Now, the Election Commission's proposal to mandate more disclosures from political parties to explain possible ways of financing poll promises has sparked a debate. Now, several opposition parties have slammed the move as an overreach. The letter on poll promises comes just months after the EC told the Supreme Court that it will not want to regulate policy decisions by political parties. In fact, joining us now to discuss this further is with us the Finance Minister of Tamil Nadu, Mr. Thiaga Rajan. Mr. Thiaga Rajan, thank you so much for taking our time and speaking to CNBC TV18. The first question I want to ask you is, this is fresh on the heels of the latest move coming by the Election Commission. I just want to draw your attention to the tweet from this morning. I woke up to this tweet. It says, when it suits social welfare, when it does not, freebie. Would you care to expand on that?
First, thank you for having me. I've had this discussion multiple times over the last 2-3 years, going back to the terms of reference of the 15th Finance Commission, where they gave a reference saying that there should be kind of negative weighting or a discouragement given to people who did populist measures. At the time, I asked the question in writing on behalf of the DMK, what do you define as populist measures? In a democracy, it's very hard that you have an arbiter, a neutral arbiter that says which is populist and which is welfare. So I reiterate that point multiple times in the last kind of 2 months or so. First of all, I'm shocked that such an issue should be in the courts, any court in any democracy, because the courts are there to kind of adjudicate the law, not to preempt it, not to say what should and shouldn't be acceptable in the way the administration works. The second question is, how is it that when the union government makes a decision to give free food to 800 million people coincidentally ahead of elections, and it costs 40-something thousand crores, that's not considered a freebie? But heaven forbid that somebody else should give something else, then it's called revenue culture. So this kind of one rule for me, one rule for everybody else, which is characteristic of this union government.
Sure.
I think this is just a prime example of that.
The follow-up question I want to ask is that this move by the Election Commission to seek the advice from various political parties is being termed as a volte-face. The reason being that in their earlier position before the Apex Court, they had clarified that they want to have nothing to do with this. They don't even want to be on the expert panel, as that would add a political color. But now we find that just days after that, the Election Commission has taken on a new position whereby it is now seeking advice on how perhaps it can be included measures against freebies within the model code of conduct. Does this perhaps raise questions in terms of how the EC has gone about this, volte-face as it's being called?
Yeah, I mean, for the benefit of most people, I would call it a dramatic U-turn, right? What you'd call the volte-face. So I say, of course, it raises concerns, right? It raises concerns far beyond this one instance. It raises concerns about the neutrality of the Election Commission. It raises concerns about the rationality or application of mind of the Election Commission. If you can appear in the Supreme Court of India and give one statement, and then 30 or 60 days later, you do a completely opposite thing, then it questions whether this is functioning as a truly independent and sane, logical entity or not. And as with many other institutions in India, it creates the concern that there has been a capture of institutions or erosion or decay of institutions. And this is completely, unhealthy for democracy. And it's more than that, right? Because in the history of the world, there has never been a good outcome for increasing capture of institutions, right? Even this old kind of, what can I say, fake adage that said, Mussolini was authoritarian, but the trains ran on time. In fact, the trains never ran on time. The more you take control of systems and you destroy the nature of a democracy and of a multifaceted system, the more you concentrate power in one place and make it a one-side game, you are guaranteed to fail economically. There's in development. There's no debate here. So of course it raises concerns about whether the Election Commission is A, neutral, and B, applying its mind consistently if it can go from black to white in less than 60 days.
Sure. I spoke to some lawyers who, in fact, have been, raising concerns on behalf of the petitioners. What they point out is that this latest move by the Election Commission is merely fine-tuning of a guideline which is already in existence since 2013. Post the Subramanian Balaji verdict, Supreme Court asked the EC to formulate guidelines. It did formulate the guideline and very clearly laid out that parties must demonstrate the rationale for the promise and indicate ways and means to meet financial requirements. This was an EC guideline going back to 2015 Model Code of Conduct. The question that is now being asked, just to play the devil's advocate, is why make a fuss now? This has already been in existence for over 7 years.
I agree and I disagree. I agree in the sense, if that had been their position, they should have stated that in the Supreme Court 2 months ago or 40 days ago, whenever it was. I still worry about an institution that says black in the Supreme Court and then goes and does white in a letter to parties. So, at that level, I still think it causes a loss of trust in the independence and sanity of the institution if it does such U-turns. At a different level, I couldn't agree more with you. I have no problem with the logic either in the 13 judgment or the 15 guidelines or today, where they say parties should be asked to validate. My question is, the history of our accounting systems and our methodology leaves a lot to be desired. If you look at the last, let's say, 5 years or 8 years of both financial statements of the states as well as the union, you take the projection under the FRBM mandated MTFP, medium-term fiscal plan, you take the budget that comes up, you take the revised estimate, you take the final account.
Sure.
And I'm not even saying during the COVID period, I'm saying leave that such calamitous events out. The rest of the time, the finances are greatly varying in these statements. The numbers are greatly varying in these statements. Again, I said this to the Finance Commission of India when they came, the 15th Finance Commission. I said, if you look at the MTFP projections under the FRBM Act at the states, neither the union nor the states have a good track record of being able to project their own revenues, their own budget, and their own economy 1 year forward very well, let alone 2 years forward. How are you, the union government, going to project now 2 years forward and then 5 years from there? So from T+2 to T+7 for all states at that time and the union, and then make the devolution formula based on what those numbers are going to be. It's like an exercise in futility, right? It's like throwing at a dartboard that has the infinite spinning speed to be able to hit the bullseye. So I think, in theory, I have no problem with the logic of extending the granularity of the definition that's already in the 2015 guideline to a new guideline 22.
Sure.
I still say, why didn't you say so in the Supreme Court a little while ago? And why do you now act as if you've been looking for a loophole in which to follow some diktat and you're following it? And I worry that it's still going to be an exercise in futility because the numbers are so all over the place. Because if I read the guideline right, it says something equal and that the government shall provide certain data as the basis on which that party shall now say what they're going to do in the manifesto. Well, the government's data itself turns out to be erratic.
Sure.
So what if that data is skewed when it's being provided? Is there an accountability factor in that? So these things get infinitely complicated and very hard to practically either enforce or actually create value out of. That's my concern.
Sure. Another question, one of the concerns that you had raised is whether or not the court should intervene in this matter at all. And that this was, in fact, a sentiment that was also echoed by Kapil Sibal. His advice was sought by the Chief Justice himself on this matter. He said, we have an FRBM mechanism. Let's tighten it. Let's add more teeth if at all required. But there is no need for the courts to intervene. What is your take on this? Is this an issue that should perhaps be debated in broader public domain, or is this perhaps the court is the best platform to adjudicate this issue?
I have never seen any democratic country, at least, I think I've operated businesses or worked in a few dozen, and I've traveled to about 60. I have not yet seen a democratic country where the judicial system should be the decider of how money is raised or spent, right? That is almost in every democracy the exclusive domain of elected legislators, and then through them the government, right? Because you have a house, you have to pass a budget. My concern is a bit more profound in what you said, right? Because if you're going to look at who is really being controlled and who is being held accountable, in any democracy, we should not create a higher hurdle for opposition than those who are sitting in government. Right? We're sitting in the state government now. We're a regional party. At some level, I would say that we are in an advantageous situation if you make our opponents jump through hoops that we don't have to sitting in government. But as a believer in democracy and the constitution at heart, I ask the question, if you start applying some benchmark to people who are sitting outside the government that is effectively not binding on the people who are sitting inside the government, is this good for democracy? First question.
Sure.
Second question, if you go down to a level of granularity about what is and isn't, good accounting or good logic or good finance. Let's say I give a statement. Let's say I'm going to finance it this way. Who is going to validate that that statement is actually a doable thing? Who's going to be the authority? Which neutral financial authority, of India is going to validate the possibility of my funding model for my freebie is valid or not valid? If I'm inside the government, it's very easy. I put it into the government's policy. I don't have to go through such a hoop. Now you go to the last part of your question, which is the whole question of FRBM and so forth. In fact, the FRBM has not been, in uniform value add across the country, right? If you look at the union government, I think the FRBM Act has been amended or effectively, extended the deadline for reaching compliance. Every year of the 18 years or 19 years has been in existence. In the state of Tamil Nadu, that was not the case. In the state of Tamil Nadu, it did a brilliant job. Our equivalent act, you see, the FRBM only applies to the parliament. The equivalent act in Tamil Nadu is called the FRA Act, the Financial Responsibility Act in 2003. The FRA Act produced outstanding, brilliant results, right? The debt to GDP ratio of Tamil Nadu went down from 28% or so down to 16 or 17% in 11 or 12 years across ADMK, DMK, ADMK, across all the governments that have existed in that period. The interest to revenue ratio went down from something like 21% down to about 11%, again across both governments and multiple terms. It's only after Ms. Jayalalitha passed that it's become really defunct, and our predecessors ran it into the ground. We are correcting it, and we'll correct it much more rapidly than I thought by the leadership of the Chief Minister, the competence that we have, and the control that we're able to bring. But the question is that FRA is not the limiting factor for me. The limiting factor, how many ever times I amend the FRA in my assembly, on top of that, the union government sends us a letter every year and says that under Article 293.3 of the Constitution, this is the exact down to the last crore of rupees money that you shall borrow. This is your debt limit. So if there is already that much control on a state... You raised a very interesting
point about Article 293. Mr. Thiaga Rajan, you've raised a very interesting point about the exercise of power under Article 293. But that's a very large debate. I think we'll have to reserve that for another day. We'd like to thank you so much for joining us and sharing your very interesting thoughts. The matter, of course, continues before the top court.